Caught my spoiled sister kissing my BF a week before her wedding. Told her fiancé, thought he ignored it, but he shocked everyone at the wedding. This story is very meaningful. Everyone should hear it. Listen to Brian tell the story. The wedding venue was breathtaking, a grand hall adorned with cascading white roses, golden chandeliers illuminating the soft ivory drapery, and rows of elegantly dressed guests murmuring in hushed excitement. At the altar stood Mark, dashing in his tailored tuxedo, his hands clasped together as he awaited his bride. But the air shifted the moment the grand doors at the back creaked open. Whispers rippled through the room like wildfire as heads turned, eyes widening in shock. It wasn't Sarah walking in. It was me. I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the polished marble floor, my hands gripping the small clutch where I held the evidence that would tear Sarah's perfect day apart. My parents, seated in the front row, stiffened at the sight of me. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, and my father let out a barely concealed sigh of frustration. "What the hell is she doing here?" I heard Sarah's best friend Ashley hiss under her breath. Mark's best man, Ethan, watched me with a curious tilt of his head, his sharp eyes catching the determination in mine. And then Sarah appeared at the opposite end of the room, frozen in the hallway, still outside the entrance. Her face went from confusion to sheer panic. She wasn't supposed to see me here, not after what had happened. Her eyes flicked to Mark, as if hoping he would ignore my presence and proceed as planned. But Mark wasn't looking at her. He was looking at us, me. I stopped a few feet from the altar, my voice steady but loud enough for all to hear. "Before this wedding continues," I said, "Mark deserves to know the truth." Gasps filled the room. Sarah's face drained of all color. "Olivia, don't you dare!" my mother hissed, her voice low but full of warning. I turned to Mark, my heart pounding, but my resolve unshaken. "Mark, you need to know what happened a week ago. You need to know what Sarah has been hiding from you." Mark's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" The tension in the air was suffocating. I took a deep breath and met Sarah's horrified gaze. "A week ago," I said, my voice unwavering, "I caught my sister kissing my boyfriend." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Murmurs erupted, hushed but urgent, like an approaching storm. All eyes darted between Sarah and me, while Mark's expression morphed from confusion to something darker, something that made Sarah visibly recoil. "Olivia!" my mother hissed, rising halfway from her seat. "This is not the time or place. It's exactly the time and place," I cut her off. My voice, though calm, echoed through the grand hall. I turned my attention fully to Mark, who hadn't moved, his knuckles white as he clenched his fists at his sides. "You deserve to know before you make the biggest mistake of your life." Sarah found her voice then. "She's lying," she blurted out, her tone high-pitched, desperate. I ignored her and reached into my clutch. With a deep breath, I pulled out my phone and pressed play. The audio filled the room. "God, Tom, we shouldn't be doing this," Sarah's voice giggled through the speakers. "But you're so much more exciting than Mark." A stunned silence fell over the guests. "You say that now," Tom's voice came through, low and smug. "But after the wedding, I doubt you'll be able to keep yourself from sneaking away to see me." Someone gasped. A woman in the back whispered, "Oh my God!" Mark's face went blank, not angry, not shocked, just hollow. Sarah lunged forward, her heels clacking furiously against the floor. "That's fake! She's trying to ruin my wedding!" She turned wildly to our parents, her breath coming out in sharp bursts. "Mom!" Dad, assistant, was speechless. I turned back to Mark. "I saw them, Mark, in our parents' backyard." She had her arms wrapped around him, kissing him like she wasn't about to walk down the aisle to you. And when they saw me, they didn't even try to deny it. Mark's gaze shifted slowly to Sarah. "You swore you loved me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah reached for him. "I do." "Mark, please, she's just bitter. She's always been jealous of me." Mark took a step back. "Don't touch me." The weight of his words crushed whatever last hope she had. The murmuring among the guests turned into a full-blown wave of scandalized whispers. My cousin Emma was recording from the side, her face gleeful. Aunt Rebecca, sipping from her champagne glass, muttered, "Well, damn, finally." Double asterisk. Mark took a deep breath, his shoulders straightening. Then, in front of everyone, he pulled the wedding ring out of his pocket, looked at it for a long moment, before letting it drop onto the marble floor. The sound of it hitting echoed louder than any words could. Sarah let out a broken sob. "We're done," Mark said. And just like that, he turned and walked out of his own wedding. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stood frozen, her perfectly manicured nails trembling as she clutched the folds of her expensive wedding gown. The pristine white fabric, meant to symbolize purity and love, now looked like a costume, something borrowed, something fake. Gasps, whispers, and a few scandalized chuckles spread through the crowd like wildfire. My mother finally found her voice, though it was a frantic choke sound. "Mark! Mark! Come back! This is a misunderstanding." But Mark didn't stop. He strode down the aisle with purpose, his best man, Ethan, quick to follow. Sarah, now trembling with rage, whirled on me. "You did this," she shrieked. "You're just a jealous, pathetic—" "Oh, cut the crap." "Sarah." I barely recognized my own voice. It was steady, sharp, and so much calmer than I felt inside. Sarah's lips trembled. Her mascara, once pristine, was now smudging under the weight of her tears. "You know what's pathetic?" I continued, taking a slow step toward her. "You had everything, the perfect wedding, a loyal fiancé, parents who treated you like royalty. But that still wasn't enough for you, was it? You had to go after my Ras boyfriend too." She shook her head, her chest heaving. I wasn't." Aunt Rebecca, never one to hold back, spoke up from the front row. "Oh, honey, we all heard the recording. Don't embarrass yourself further." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Sarah let out a strangled sob. Then, as if the universe itself wasn't done humiliating her, the grand doors burst open again. And in walked Tom. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened, but his smirk? That one was still perfectly intact. He strolled in like he owned the place, his eyes flicking lazily between me and Sarah. "So," he drawled, "I guess the secret's out." My stomach twisted in disgust. Sarah, still desperate, turned toward him. "Tom," she gasped, "tell them the truth. Tell them we—" But Tom wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. "You know," he mused, stuffing his hands into his pockets, "I actually expected you to cry. Olivia, beg me to take you back, maybe." Rage boiled in my veins. Before I could say anything, though Mark's voice cut through the room, he had reappeared at the doorway, Ethan standing firmly beside him. "What the hell are you doing here?" Mark demanded. His eyes locked on Tom. Tom gave a lazy shrug. "Figured I'd check in, see how things played out. Didn't expect you to throw such a dramatic exit. Though, you really walked out on your own wedding?" Mark's jaw clenched. "I walked out on a liar," Sarah flinched. Tom chuckled. "Damn, guess you're not as much of an idiot as I thought." And that one was the moment Mark snapped. Before anyone could react, his fist collided with Tom's face. A collective gasp echoed through the hall. Tom stumbled backward, clutching his jaw, his smirk now replaced with something furious and unhinged. But Mark wasn't done. "You disrespected me," he said, his voice eerily calm. "You disrespected Olivia, and you disrespected yourself." Tom spat blood onto the pristine white floor. "Oh, give me a break," he sneered. "You weren't even that into Sarah. Everyone knew she settled for you." Sarah Hart gasped. "Excuse me?" "Oh, come on," Tom scoffed, turning to her. "You think I wanted you? You threw yourself at me. Babe," he let out a bitter laugh. "And you were just dumb enough to think I'd stick around after this." Whatever fight was left in Sarah crumbled. In that moment, Mark took a deep breath and shook his head. Then, turning toward me, he said, "Come on. You don't need to be here for this disaster." And for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled, because he was right. Without another glance at Sarah or Tom, I walked out of that wedding with my head held high. As I stepped outside, the cool evening air hit my skin, refreshing and freeing. Behind me, the chaos of Sarah's ruined wedding continued, a cacophony of gasps, whispers, and the faint, muffled sobs of my sister. I didn't turn back. I had spent my whole life living in her shadow, being dismissed, ignored, and treated like an afterthought. But not anymore. Mark followed closely, his stride steady despite the emotional storm I knew he must have been feeling. Ethan walked beside him, glancing at me with a smirk. "Well, that was one hell of a show," Ethan muttered under his breath, adjusting his tie. I let out a small, humorless laugh. "Not exactly how I planned my Saturday." Mark exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "I can't believe I almost married her," he admitted, his voice thick with disbelief. "I should have seen the signs." I stopped walking and turned to face him. "It's not your fault, Mark." He looked at me then, his expression unreadable. "Maybe not, but damn, I feel like an idiot." "Hey, at least you didn't actually say I do," Ethan pointed out, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "Could have been worse." Mark scoffed but nodded. "Yeah, could have been way worse." A car honked in the distance. We stood there, just outside the grand venue, the weight of everything finally settling in. The betrayal, the humiliation, the sheer absurdity of it all. Then, as if on cue, Sarah burst through the doors. Her wedding gown, once pristine, was now slightly askew, her veil lopsided. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her cheeks streaked with tears. And she was furious. "Olivia!" she shrieked. I turned slowly, tilting my head. "Yes, dear sister." Her lips trembled. For a moment, I thought she might break down completely. But then, she snapped. "You ruined everything," she wailed. "You couldn't just let me have one moment, could you? You've always been jealous of me, always trying to take things away from me." Ethan let out a low whistle. "Wow, the delusion is strong with this one." Sarah ignored him, her wild, furious eyes locked onto me. "You did this on purpose. You planned this. You did this to yourself, Sarah." My voice was calm even, but sharp enough to slice through her hysterics. She faltered. I took a step closer. "You betrayed your fiancé. You went after me, boyfriend. You made your own choices and now you're just mad that you got caught." I crossed my arms. "Tell me, was it worth it?" She swallowed hard, her breathing ragged. Mark shook his head, his tone filled with disgust. "I can't believe I ever loved you." Her head snapped toward him. "Mark, please." But he had already turned away. And just like that, Sarah lost. She lost. I could see it in her eyes, the realization that she had finally, truly been exposed. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the victim. She wasn't the golden child. She was just the girl who ruined her own damn wedding. Tom, ever the snake, strolled out behind her, hands in his pockets. He smirked, shaking his head. "Damn, and here I thought this would be a fun weekend." Sarah more swirled on him. You said you cared about me." He laughed. Actually laughed. "Sarah, sweetheart, let's not kid ourselves," he said, still grinning. "You were just a fun little distraction. I never actually wanted you." Her breath hitched. I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered every time she made me feel unsmall. Every time she laughed at my expense. Every time she took and Chiu never gave back. No, she deserved this. Tom patted her on the shoulder like she was a child throwing a tantrum. "Cheer up, babe. At least you still have that fancy dress." And with that, he walked away. Sarah stood there, her world crumbling, her hands shaking. She turned back to me one last time, but there was nothing left to say. I smiled, lifted my chin, and walked away. This time, I wasn't the one left behind. As I walked away from the wreckage of Sarah's perfect day, a strange sense of peace settled over me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being blamed for things I didn't do. I wasn't the one left picking up the pieces. This time, Sarah was. I could still hear the faint echoes of her sobs behind me, but I didn't look back. Mark caught up with me after a few moments, his expression unreadable. We stood by the parking lot, both of us silent, the weight of everything that had just happened pressing down on us. "So," I finally said, exhaling. "What now?" He let out a humorless chuckle. "Hell if I know." We leaned against the car in silence. Then Ethan, ever the opportunist, clapped his hands together. Well, that was dramatic as hell, he mused, pulling out his phone. I'm going to give this wedding a 0-star review. I snorted. Despite everything, I actually laughed. Mark shot him a look but shook his head, amusement flickering in his eyes. You're an idiot. Yeah, but I'm a lovable idiot, Ethan quipped. So, what now? Do we go get drunk? I feel like that's what people do after disasters. I hesitated. Technically, I should have been heartbroken. My boyfriend had just betrayed me. My sister had just solidified herself as the worst person I'd ever known. My entire family was probably imploding as we spoke. And yet, I felt free. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next disaster. It had already happened. And now, all right, I was done. Mark must have sensed my thoughts because he turned to me with a small, tired smile. Come on, he said. Let's get out of here. Ethan grinned. Drinks on me. I nodded, letting them lead the way. Behind us, the chaos continued. Sarah's world was crumbling. But mine was finally beginning. As we left the venue, a wave of relief washed over me. The tension that had wrapped around my chest for weeks, maybe even years, was finally unraveling. No more being gaslit. No more being made to feel like I was the crazy one. No more living in my sister's shadow. I climbed into the passenger seat of Mark's car, Ethan sliding into the back. He was already pulling up bar recommendations on his phone. So, Ethan said, scrolling, do we want classy cocktails? Dive bar with questionable health standards? Or shots until we forget this ever happened? I let out a breath, shaking my head. Something strong, but not too strong. I'd like to remember Sarah's public downfall for the rest of my life. Mark chuckled as he started the engine. Yeah, that was a moment. I glanced at him. Are you okay? He exhaled. Honestly, I don't know. I should be devastated, right? I was supposed to be getting married today. Ethan leaned forward between the seats. Nah, man. You dodged a nuclear missile. That wasn't a wedding. That was a hostage situation. We just staged your escape. I laughed, and even Mark cracked a smile. I guess you're right, he admitted. Honestly, I think the worst part is just how blind I was. I really thought she loved me. I glanced out the window as the city lights blurred past. I get it, I said softly. I thought Tom loved me too. A silence settled between us, heavy but not uncomfortable. Then Ethan, unable to tolerate too much seriousness, clapped his hands together. Okay, no more sad talk. You know what we need? I turned slightly. What? He grinned. A revenge drink. Mark raised an eyebrow. A what now? Ethan leaned back, looking smug. You know, a celebration drink for surviving absolute insanity. A toast to escaping toxic relationships. A well-earned goodbye to your psycho sister and her even worser life choices. I smirked. I could get behind that. Mark nodded. Yeah, that actually sounds good. Ethan pumped a fist. Hell yes, we're getting wasted. As we pulled up to a small, cozy-looking bar, I felt lighter than I had in years. This wasn't the ending I had planned, but maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something better. As we stepped into the bar, the warm hum of conversation and the low melody of an old jazz song greeted us. It was a nice place, not too fancy, not too grimy. Just right for a fresh start. Ethan wasted no time, marching up to the counter like a man on a mission. Bartender, 3 drinks. Make them strong. We're celebrating. The bartender, a grizzled-looking guy with tattoos up his arms, raised an eyebrow. Celebrating what? Ethan leaned on the counter, grinning. Escaping toxic relationships. The bartender let out a chuckle. Damn. Rough day. You have no idea. Mark and I slid onto the stools beside him as the bartender started pouring. I could feel my phone vibrating in my pocket, the screen lighting up with notifications. Sarah, Tom, my parents. I didn't even look. Instead, I turned it off and shoved it deep into my bag. Tonight, I was done. Mark followed my lead, flipping his phone over so the screen faced down. Ethan noticed and smirked. Damn, 2 whole phones flipped? This is serious business. The bartender slid 3 drinks across the counter. A deep amber liquid, strong and steady. On the house, he said with a wink. Sounds like you guys earned it. I picked up my glass, feeling the cool condensation against my fingertips. Ethan held his up, waiting. To freedom? He offered. Mark let out a breath, then clinked his glass against ours. To finally seeing people for who they really are. I smiled, meeting both of their eyes. To new beginnings. We tipped our glasses back. The burn was sharp, but it felt good. The night stretched on, filled with laughter. Ridiculous stories and the kind of conversations that only happen when people finally let go of what's been weighing them down. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for something bad to happen. I was moving forward. And for once, it felt damn good. As the night wore on, I found myself staring at the bottom of my empty glass, the last remnants of melted ice swirling lazily. The weight in my chest had lessened, but I knew that the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. Sarah and my parents wouldn't let this go. Tom would probably find a way to play the victim. But for the first time, I didn't care. I glanced at Mark, who was laughing at one of Ethan's ridiculous stories. Despite everything, there was relief in his expression, like he was finally free. Maybe we both were. As we stepped outside, the night air crisp and fresh, I looked up at the sky. This wasn't the end of the story, not even close. But for once, I wasn't afraid of what came next, because whatever happened, I was finally ready. Life has a funny way of showing you who people truly are. Sometimes betrayal comes from the people you least expect, the ones you've trusted the most. But the beauty of it is, once the mask falls, you finally see things for what they are. No more illusions, no more pretending, just the raw, painful, liberating truth. And with truth comes power. If you've ever been gaslit into doubting your own reality, if you've ever been betrayed by the people closest to you, know this: you are not crazy. Trust your instincts, stand your ground, and never let someone else's lies define your reality. What happens next? Well, that's the fun part, isn't it? If you want to see where this story goes from here, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted Sarah sooner? Would you have walked away? Or would you have gone for the ultimate revenge? Let me know, and I'll see you in part 2.